Did Mary Baker Eddy think that there were false teachers in the movement? Hi, my name is Julie. I was born into the Christian Science church and religion, and after 40 years, I went my own way. And I feel like that brought me back to a greater understanding of Mary Baker Eddy's original teachings that we're spiritual beings, and matter is just our thoughts. And if we keep it matter as our thoughts, we're good. But if we think of matter as substance, then that's a problem, and that's what we've got to unwind from. Every day I open up my ProseWorks these days. It's been a couple of years now I've been doing this with ProseWorks, and I read what is there for me, and it's always something spot on what I need. It never lets me down, and sometimes I keep turning to the same one over and over and over again for months or longer, and till I get the point of what I'm being told, from the divine mind, what I'm being shown. And so I thought it came to me to share what I opened to this morning. And that was an article in Miscellaneous Writings on page 368 called Take Heed. And it's only 2 paragraphs, so I thought I could read it to you. Take heed. We regret to be obliged to say that all are not metaphysicians or Christian Scientists who call themselves so. Charlatanism, fraud, and malice are getting into the ranks of the good and pure, sending forth a poison more deadly than the upas-tree in the eastern archipelago. This evil obtains in the present false teachings and false practice of the science of treating disease through mind. The silent address of a mental malpractitioner can only be portrayed in these words of the apostle, whisperers, and the poison of asps is under their tongue. Some of the mere puppets of the hour are playing only for money and at a fearful stake. Others, from malice and envy, are working out the destinies of the damned. But while the best, perverted on the mortal plane, may become the worst, let us not forget that the Lord reigns, and that this earth shall sometime rejoice in his supreme rule, that the tired watchmen on the walls of Zion and the true Christian Scientist at the foot of the Mount of Revelation shall look up with shouts and thanksgiving, that God's law, as in divine science, shall be finally understood, and the gospel of glad tidings bring on earth peace, goodwill toward men. So the answer is yes. She did believe that there were false teachers and false Christian Scientists within the movement, people that call themselves Christian Scientists but aren't. Simply aren't, and that's what she's saying. Charlatanism, fraud, and malice are getting into the ranks of the good and pure, sending forth a poison more deadly than the upas-tree in the eastern archipelago. So, when I opened this up, I prayed about it for a while, and I listened. Is this me? Am I being a false teacher? And I prayed, and my husband prayed with me, and we listened, and we wound up hearing that, no, this was what I was to share today. And I always make sure that I apply it to myself first. Everything I turn to should be applied to me first. That's because Christian Science is about our individual relationship with the truth, and it's about our growth and our ascension, and it's not about other people. And so everything, is, what do I need to get from this? It was so ingrained in us not to talk about error and not to call out error, kind of as growing up as in the Christian Science movement. And I remember when there was a gentleman at our church who was taking advantage of people, who was pretending to be good, pretending and putting on airs of, and he would walk around saying, all is harmony. Everything is harmonious. Like anytime there was a discussion on stuff, and it was like, everyone's like, oh, yeah. And he had been the first reader many times, and he'd been around, and when I started hearing and finding out things that had been kind of hidden and thrown under the rug, and that things they never talked about, people never talked about, everyone had experiences, like many people had experiences with them that they hadn't talked about. A wonderful, sweet, wonderful family was driven out of the church by him. They didn't talk about it with anyone. I didn't know it until after the fact, after I had addressed it and we had decided to ask him to leave. Two of us decided, to talk to him about it. And one of them, she, a friend of mine, she decided that she had a close relationship. She was going to talk to him, and she was going to ask him to leave, or, and before the conversation even finished, he said he would be leaving on his own. And my friend had experiences with him borrowing large sums of money from her. One of his friends had burst into the church during a service demanding money from him. That, other elderly women he had borrowed large sums of money from. He had driven out a young man that was joining our church through really not a good way. And that had been buried, even though the board knew about it. They had decided to take his side instead of this young man's side. And since no one talked about it, no one really knew the extent of it until Love started while I think I was the board chair at the time, or was it? Yeah, I think so. I started finding all this stuff and finding out and having, friendships with these people and finding things out that they would just say to me out of the blue, and they were like, oh boy. And it was a necessary cleansing of the church, because a false claimant of Christian Science destroys the good. And when I finally presented my findings in a letter to the board and to other members of the church, I remember one gentleman, we don't do this. This is not how things are done. Error is not something we go after and we talk about, and it was like, really? And, here we go. Take heed is an article that she put in one of the periodicals that made it here to Miscellaneous Writings. And if you go through Miscellaneous Writings, not uncovering error was not something Mrs. Eddy, she would not have agreed with that. If you read any of the articles in Miscellaneous, or if you read any of her writings, error found out is 2/3 destroyed. Uncover error and it turns the lie upon you. Uncover, reveal. Her process of unwinding from the dream, the first thing is self-knowledge. Finding, asking what in my own thinking is the roadblocks to my waking up. What in, you're asking for the errors to be revealed. Truth is truth is truth is truth. Truth is the basis of the universe. It is what is. And truth is never lost. We just seem to separate ourselves from truth through, all these things we learn as this belief of being immortal, as belief of being, the human ego. And so you never have to worry about truth. Like, truth can take care of itself. It's not at all threatened. The errors are what need to be revealed. And once we see them, they dissipate. They start to lose their hold on us. But the reason she wanted us to start with self-knowledge, examining ourselves, to see how much sin had claimed of us and how much that claim we admit is valid or comply with, is because it's hidden there already. The error is already hidden within our thought. It's already wreaking havoc. It's already causing problems. It is already the source of so much trouble in our lives, illness, all kinds of things. And just to have it uncovered, that is tremendous strength. There is tremendous strength and power in allowing those errors to surface in our thoughts. But if we let them hide, they fester and they cause, this man was he was being governed by mortal mind. The spiritual being back of it is innocent. But in belief, he was being governed by mortal mind, by this, whatever it was a need to appear holy, a need to appear as the great Christian Scientist that people can look up to. There were some more nefarious things underlying it that came out of this. Things that were, you wouldn't want your friends and family around this person if you knew these things. But by not allowing error to surface in the church, we were subjecting all of our friends and family to this person. And, we lost this very dear family, and who knows how many other, who knows how many other people within our church left because they could sense this duality there, something's not right here, or they got driven out in similar reasons. It's so funny, like, you hear, like, I'm a Christian Scientist because I call myself a Christian Scientist, and everyone else is like, oh yeah, of course, I would never. But Mrs. Eddy's like, not all we are obliged to say that all are not metaphysicians or Christian Scientists who call themselves so. She's our way shower, and she's like, you can't just, we're not gonna, you call yourself one, and we're like, oh yeah, great, perfect, okay, go babysit my children, and you can have keys to the, you can have the keys to the, and the bank account numbers and access to the bank accounts, and we're just gonna, whatever you need. And now you're a practitioner, okay, I'm gonna send you my money, can you heal me? I'm gonna call you every day and ask for healing. Just, or now you're gonna become a teacher, okay, Mrs. Eddy she didn't say that. So I think we can rely on her. I think we can trust that she's telling us the truth. No, not everyone that calls themselves a Christian Scientist is a Christian Scientist. And that was really hard for me. One of the really difficult lessons, because it went against everything that, kind of had been taken for granted, like as a child. That all Christian Scientists were good. You could like rely on them. But no, she's saying there's false teachers. Take heed. There's false teachers out there. And there's some issue. Seems to be an issue with the filming, and I cannot figure it out. But I think it's okay. I remember being at a church and being a member. Well, not when I was young, we had a family that, treated their son really poorly. He was a friend of mine, and they were very big into church. I think you're on the board. That was very important to them, that they be seen and be heard and be at the top of everything, and be like, you could, their son was on the spectrum. Now that we would understand that, but it was embarrassing to them. A lot of Christian Scientists are embarrassed if their children aren't being healed of something. They feel personally like, oh, we've done it. People are going to think we're bad Christian Scientists. And so, they hid him and were embarrassed. And not only that, they drank and had, they were part of the social scene, and that wouldn't have mattered to me. But, the hypocrisy of, oh no, I'm a perfect Christian Scientist, and I don't do it, I don't do all these things. I think you find a lot of hypocrisy in the church because people are doing all these things that, they're fine, they're normal, they're not abusing alcohol, they're not hurting their families, they're not alcoholics, they just they just want to be like everybody else. Fine, that's not a problem. But they're having to live a double life of, this is the way I am at church, and follow all these rules. And of course the church at that time has at that time, and still today, many churches have applications that you have to say that you don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't take medicine, and all these things. And this church would have been no different. And so you're having to live a double life, and having to live that double life really, it already is the start of a lot of problems, because you're saying one thing and living another, isn't it wouldn't be a problem, but you have to lie about it to be a member of the church, to be high up in the church, to be on the board too. Like this man had to lie about his sexual orientation. He felt he had to lie about it. And in doing that, it really was, it caused him a lot of, Mrs. Eddy would call it, moral idiocy, where so long having to lie so much, not just about his sexual orientation, but about, I am the perfect Christian Scientist. And like, he was always the one, telling people what they were doing wrong, and being the one that, was holier than thou, and trying to keep everyone in line. And, and if we were getting out of, it grew into this greater and greater hypocrisy. It's tough on people when you live this life of hypocrisy because you think you have to. It really does a number on Christian Scientists. And I think a lot of the stuff we deal with, a lot of the false Christian Scientists are coming from that place of feeling they have to hide the stuff, which really they shouldn't have to hide. You shouldn't have to hide your sexual orientation. You shouldn't have to hide if you drink, or or you smoke, or like a friend of mine, she would smoke all the way to church and then go in and be the perfect Christian, and I think, well, we're just doing what we have to do to be a member. But really, do you have to, and do you really want to be a member of a church that just requires you to, just tell me you're not doing any of these things and you can be a member? Is that good for you? Is that good for your soul? Is that good for your friends and family who know you? I don't know. And maybe that's where a lot of this comes from. I was on a committee. It was the committee that goes to the jails, and there was this woman who I think the chairman, and she just was so angry at me and so angry at everyone. And she's known in the movement as being in the movement where we live as being the one that, we're not following this and you're not following that, and she's everything has to be followed to the letter. And and she's very she has driven so many people out of the churches. And I had this instance with it when I was alone with her, and my husband and I were alone with her after a committee meeting, and there was a big bubble around her of anger. And it was the weirdest thing. It was the first time I had felt from somebody. It was like this whole force field around her, and I was I could almost touch it. And I was across 10 feet from her, and I was like, what's going on? What is this? And I was brand new to being back in Christian Science and really just trying to figure it all out. And I'm like, what's going on here? What is this? What's going on? What's upsetting you? And I said, and I could feel all during the meeting she was upset with us, and just we weren't following maybe protocol, maybe we weren't, there's certain, everything had to be followed and rules had to be, and she got so angry at me, and I was like, wow. I said, that's not the Christ. And she yelled at me, you're telling me I'm not the Christ? And I was like, well, this is not what I'm aware of, which I have no idea what it's not the Christ. That's not the presence of the Christ. And she just, and then ran out and then wrote me this, I was a journalistic practitioner at the time, and wrote me this scathing letter and sent one to the mother church too. And I didn't read it. I let my husband read it, and he said, yeah, you don't want to read it. And because I didn't want to malpractice her. And I didn't want to have that temptation to be like, oh, wow. But it was a learning experience for me that that these people that are really what is it? What's coming to me is somewhere they put limitations on us that they wouldn't limit themselves with, and hopefully it'll come to me, but that it sometimes is an overcompensation factor that certain people feel if they feel they're not living up to the standards of Christian Science, that they maybe overcompensate by pointing their finger at everyone else who they feel is not living up to the standards of Christian Science. And they become the ones in the church that drive the people out, that make you feel like poo-poo, that like, I don't know anything, and I'm a terrible Christian Scientist. And they're there in the littlest. We had 20 members. We had one, and this other church that she was at, same situation, and the other church in our area, that they had a gay man try and join, and so they changed their bylaws so that you can't be gay to be a member. You can't be gay, and they're there. Even this church had 3 members, and all 3 of them, that was their decision. And the thing with the translation, with the lesson, the golden text and sometimes responsive reading are in different translations. Well, there's a lot of people that think that that's against the manual, although I don't know that it is, because it's the golden text, and I don't know. I don't know, and I don't care, honestly. I like reading the golden text and the responsive reading and the different versions that they do. I enjoy it. But they think that for some reason, since Mrs. Eddy only authorized the King James Version, that nothing we read, in the services can be a different translation. And some of them started their own church, and others make their church print out the original King James translation anytime there's another translation in the golden text or responsive readings. These people are so scared that is a trespass of Christian Science. And what I've learned about Christian Science, and what I've been learning, is it's about the practice of the truth. It's about living it. You have it only as you live it. And it's not like I think we learn from our predecessors. The Jewish people are our predecessors, and the law was everything to them. And Jesus was like, he's like, yeah, I get that Abraham and Moses and the law, it came down, and he said, but he went and he healed on the Sabbath. His disciples didn't have to wash their hands before meals. And the apostles went on to eat meat. They had, one of them had a vision, that it was okay to eat meat, or to meet with somebody who wasn't a Jewish. Jesus overthrew all those laws, even though, that was Abraham, that was Moses, that was, and it didn't, because and that was like a big point of his teaching. He's telling them, you see the Pharisees, you see the high people in the church, do what they're telling you to do. Listen to the Talmud, or whatever it was that they read from, the book of, I think we call it the Talmud now, but don't do what they do. They go sit in the high seats of the church, and they expect to be respected and bowed down to, and everyone's oh, you're so great, oh, you're so great, whatever you say, we do. And he sat, with what they called sinners, and he ate with what they called sinners, and he was yeah, that's not a thing, when to be holier than thou, that's not a thing. And he was that's not a thing. He was actually telling the people, hey, what you learning, that's throw it away. Healing on the Sabbath, why not? Why do we need to wash? Why do they need to wash? Why do we need to wash our hands before? Where did that, you know? And Jesus is our way shower. And so what I'm learning is that, he was all about, the Beatitudes and all about the Sermon on the Mount. And I think if you're living the Beatitudes and living in the Sermon on the Mount, and you're working on your own progress, you're concentrated on you and your relationship to God, to truth, unwinding from the dream of being the mortal personality. I feel like that's what Christian Science is all about. And I think that's what Jesus was telling them. This is what it's all about. This is where it's at. And this is Eddy had to have this little manual because, people were, first of all, she didn't want a church. She wound up doing it because they were going to do it anyway. So she needed to make sure it wasn't, done by mortal mind and done by the human ego. The manual keeps the least amount of ego and human mind running the church. The least that it can possibly run the church. And so it's supposed to be very simple. And she didn't want to control Christian Science. In fact, when she talked about the manuals, she says they were laws of limitation, which she had hoped she would never have to that she would hoped she would never have to limit Christian Scientists. But these were limitations. I'll find it and put it in the notes. Yeah, in Miscellaneous. That which I said in my heart would never be needed, namely laws of limitation for a Christian Scientist. She'd hoped they wouldn't be needed. She never wanted that. She didn't want to materialize Christian science into a church, into a religion, into she knew it would eventually be dogmatic and be about creeds and what you do and what you don't do. That's where Judaism made it to. That's what happened, and that's what Christianity has made it to. You do these certain things, you get to heaven. If you don't, you go to hell. And that's where Christian Science is getting to. When I was on the board, we had a lecture, and we had to get Science and Health for everyone. We had to buy Science and Health so that everyone could have one. And the lecturer had said that, it was she was she felt people shouldn't be reading the lesson out of the full text edition. They should actually have the book and be reading it out of there. I guess it was her way of thinking, well, people read it more if they're holding it when they're reading the lesson rather than just reading the full text. I read the full text. I love the full text. I don't read it every day. I read it once. If it hits me really hard, tears and this is a beautiful, I will read it a lot more. If it's a more of a flat one, maybe someone was uninspired that was putting it together. I made it read it once and that's it. There's no, I read Science and Health and ProseWorks whenever I'm led to. Every day for many, many years, I opened up Science and Health randomly and read and studied, and I studied it for a long time, and I studied the Bible, and I've studied ProseWorks, but things, we go through, we're led, study this for a while. Okay, study that, do this, don't do anything for a while. And it's very we learn to really let go and let God lead us, let divine mind, our true self lead us into how to study, what to study, when to study, where to study. I get that a lot of people are like, well, why is Christian Science falling away? Why are churches closing, blah, blah, blah. And they're trying everything. Well, maybe it's because we're allowing, the translations and the golden text and the responsive reading. Or maybe it's, because we're, but what I'm finding out is because we're focused incorrectly. We're focused on the healing of physical illness. We're focused on like spreading this truth that we don't even know ourselves, that we haven't totally have ingrained ourselves, that, it's this relationship between us and God. It's finding out that I thought I was a human, I'm actually an immortal, and asking God to unwind me, asking the divine mind, my own mind, to unwind me, and getting, those errors of sense uncovered, which destroys them. And, letting them go. That's what repentance is, letting them go. It is just this wonderful, beautiful truth that each individual, gets to experience when they're ready. And some people are ready. People born into the church, born into a family of Christian Science may not be ready for it yet. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a path for them. Divine Mind has a path for them. They'll go take them. Divine Mind will take them here, and maybe they won't find anything there, but maybe they will find little things, and maybe not in this lifetime. But we have to kind of let that go and say, well, it's each individual's journey, and the best you can do for the movement is to be the one living it, the one loving it. Going to church isn't living it. It's going to a building on Sundays and Wednesdays. And, in some way, there's a brotherhood of man, and maybe you're needed there, maybe you're not. Maybe your time would be better spent on home, being with your family, going hiking, having only God knows what we need, and we're being told what we need. And if we're so strict on, these are the things that we need. You have to go to church, you have to be on the committees, we have to only use practitioners for healing, we have to, on and on and on. Then you're putting up all these roadblocks, these laws of limitation for yourself, where God is not limited, and God does not limit you. You're not limited. If you trust in God, God can take you on this wonderful adventure of what real Christian Science is. And it's just between you and God. It's not about what other people think of you or don't think of you. It's not about following their rules. Whose rules? Well, they're their rules. There was a bunch of humans that made those rules. Mrs. Eddy didn't say that every church has to have in their bylaws that you can't drink, smoke, take medication. Mrs. Eddy never. That is nowhere in her writings. Nowhere. Where did we get that from? Mrs. Eddy has a huge chapter on the practice, and a very nothing in the manual on practitioners except for, setting it up. But there's not even a section to govern practitioners. She expected us to work out of the need for practitioners. She expected everyone would be there. They're needed in the beginning for new people. Some new people, but you can look in Miscellaneous writings at the end. There's all those beautiful healings of people who just read the book. Brand new to Christian Science, read it, and boom. Same with Science and Health. But they're there, and then we have teachers, some good and some bad, and most in between. The teacher in her area, she only heals through mental, using the mortal mind to heal, and she only teaches using the mortal mind to heal. And I remember she was working for my dad in his last few weeks, and she told him, I'm having trouble getting into your thought. Something's blocking it. And she was trying to find the thing that was blocking getting into his thought. Those kinds of statements, they're using healing using mortal mind. That's what mortal mind does. When healing with the Christ, or the Christ healing, you go into divine mind, and you just disappear as a person, as a healer, as a teacher, and you're there in spirit, in divine mind. And if the patient or the person needing help is open to it, there will be shifts in their thought, and they will feel those shifts. They will be aware of those shifts. They will be like, oh wow, I had a revelation, and this is what I had been thinking this, and I realized that was like, why was I thinking that? But on mental healing, they'll just experience material mental healing by mortal mind. They'll just experience physical fixes, like something got fixed, but that's because their mind is being manipulated by the healer, the practitioner. Like, a teacher has been teaching as long as this woman. They should have graduated out of that by now, but they don't, because they don't know there's anything more. Maybe their teacher didn't know there's any more. And what's worse is these people that they can use the mind really effectively, mortal mind really effectively, they grow up, they can go up in the movement, because everyone's like, oh, I had this healing, I had that. Well, they don't understand that healing is not, it didn't help them ascend. It didn't help the teacher ascend. In true healing, we ascend together. We go up in thought together, and it's beautiful. That's demonstration. But they're not having that, and so they're missing out on like the good stuff of Christian Science, and they're calling this other stuff Christian Science, and so they're making their way up in the movement and writing for the periodicals, and everyone's like, oh, they're great, oh, this person. And like, there was a practitioner in my area, someone was new to Christian Science, and was asking me, who should I have as a teacher? And I said, that's between you and God. You got to listen. You got to keep your options open. You never know where this concept of a teacher is going to come from to you. And this journalist, like, practitioner, comes in, grabs her by the arm, walks her down the hall, and says, this person in our state, she's the one. Go to her. Everyone goes to her. She's the best. And yeah, that was the one. She led her to that teacher that teaches to heal by mortal mind. The teacher that teaches that homosexuality is an abomination to God, that books can be evil and need to be burned, and on and on and on and on and on. Her classes, you're not allowed to share anything that you learn from her in your classes or associations, because people might construe it as formulas. But they are formulas. But you would not know it, because this person's very high up, and there's a lot that are very high up. And Mrs. Eddy, this article, like, there's many other places in prose works where she talks about false claimants to Christian Science, so-called Christian Scientists in sheep's clothing. She mentions that in an article. She believes that people within the church are the ones that killed her, that they mentally killed her at the end because they were ready to take over. They wanted to take over. They wanted her gone. And she made Adam Dickey write his memoirs as such because he was there at that time. And she said, can you please tell people that I was mentally murdered? And he did. He wrote this book that the Mother Church hid from us until recently. But it's still hidden unless you know how to find it. Her own church. So people in her own church, she killed her mentally through malpractice. So yeah, take heed. Take heed. She kept eyes wide open. She didn't glaze over them like, error is unreal, mortal mind is unreal. You know, I think that's the feeling I got from so many people growing up in the church. It's like, oh, God is love. God is love. Oh, don't talk about that. God is love. You know, and, oh, don't bring up error. God is love. You know, and that wasn't Mrs. Eddy's Christian Science. I think that's some people's Christian Science, and maybe they should go create their own church that's like our Christian Science, not Mrs. Eddy's. And that would make it clear to others that, yeah, we really don't like the way she handled error, and you had to heal error, and like we don't like that. We just want the God is love stuff. So it would make it easier on the rest of us if they all just kind of created their own church. And, but it's not going to happen because they're not seeing it. Mortal mind has got them in this like concept of what Christian Science is, and they're not seeing it. It's being held in by an arrogance, and that arrogance, I'm right. I know I'm right, because I can heal. Because I can use the mind to mentally manipulate people into thinking they're well instead of sick. That means what I'm doing is right. But they don't really know. Most of them really don't know that that's how they're healing. But they think because they're healing, that they're right. You know, they think that healing is it. Like a friend of mine, you know, when I was going through this like starting to realize that I didn't really know if church had anything to do with the practice of Christian Science, like the individual relationship with God that I was building, the trust, the letting go, you know, the surrender to God, the self-knowledge, the repentance. Like wasn't understanding where church was fitting in, other than that church seemed to be a roadblock to my progress. And a friend and I were talking about that a lot, a group of us. And she called her teacher to ask her teacher's thoughts. And her teacher said, I don't have time for this. I'm too busy healing. So, and this is a very, entrenched teacher too. You have very entrenched teachers, those that everyone knows about, that in this area, they're the one, in that area, they're the one. And they, maybe they were the president for a year, because everyone gets to be president for a year. Or the ones that are, have caught people's eyes and gotten their attention. They get to be president for a year. And so they just start thinking to themselves, well, I must know it all. I got to be president for a year. I get an article published every week or in the Sentinel, or every month in the Journal. I have a lot of people applying for my class. My association is huge. I'm very wealthy, and people are being healed all the time. So they just automatically assume I must know. And so this air of arrogance just grows around them, and the truth just stops permeating, and they're living in this Christian, like this world of their own creating of Christians. This is my Christian Science that so many are living in and believing in, that even though divine mind is talking to them at all times, teaching them, revealing to them, they've so blocked it that, you know, if you look at Saul is a great example of, you know, someone who really, really believed he practiced the correct form of Judaism, and that Jesus and his disciples did not. And he was going to make sure that they got their comeuppance, and that he had something in him that was still open to the Christ, still open to the truth, and that allowed him to have his conversion from Saul to Paul, and to, you know, really repent. The error came to him in this form of blindness, and, you know, he wrestled, and that was not an easy thing. Put this in human terms, like Paul was a human like us. Well, you know what I mean. And he was like one of these great and powerful teachers that we have in the movement. And in so much that he was going to go round up these Christians, these people that were following Jesus's teachings, and he was going to, like, you know, but something in him, there was a little something in him that allowed for the Christ to come in, and he had this, like, moment of self-knowledge, and then he repented, and our lives are forever changed because of that, and his life was forever changed of that. But you have to really see how hard it was. What Saul to Paul went through is not an easy thing, and I think it's something we each individually go through when we come out of this arrogance of what we think Christian Science is into this, like, humility of, okay, God, you tell me what Christian Science is. I'm listening now. And who know, you know, and that begins the journey, your Paul journey. And he still, like, after he had this conversion, he went and was he gone for like 3 years, where he went and studied and was, you know, off learning for 3 years. He quit his public persona life. We don't know much about him during those 3 years that I know of. I believe it was 3 years. And then he came out, and he, you know, was the biggest proponent of Jesus, the biggest, and he, you know, so much so that the apostles were sometimes jealous, and he was, like, you know, breaking rules that they were even afraid to break. He went far beyond, because they were still, like, you know, trying to live a good Jewish life, and to a large degree. And he was like, you know, we're still being way too conservative and and he just gave his life over to God. He gave his life over to the truth, and that changed him, and it changed the world that we know today. He wasn't perfect. He recognized, you know, he started churches. He recognized that the human ego still needed some structure. And maybe in some ways, you know, it depends on what we're learning a lot, that, like, there were some mistranslations, and there were some things attributed to Paul that weren't Paul. And so, you know, there's a lot still coming up about all of that. But he transformed Christianity as we know it today, because if there was some little willingness to say, wait, let God run the show for once, and not tradition, and not, everything that I've heard and been told and been taught, and that kind of thing. And I think I had a Saul to Paul conversion, nothing like that, but I was so stuck on all this stuff, all this dogma. I wouldn't have called it dogma back then, because when we read about dogma and science and health and this, prose works, and we're thinking, oh, Christian dogma, like baptism and all those things, like where you're physically doing stuff, tithing and, the Eucharist. But we don't apply it to ourselves. I never apply it to myself. What am I doing that's, what am I hiding from others about myself, because I think that's not being a good Christian Zionist, everything. I was hiding everything. Turns out, and when nothing to hide, wasn't nothing to hide, nothing I needed to hide. I don't know. So, some of this article, some of the mere puppets of the hour are playing only for money and at a fearful stake. It's still that today, it's still a lot about the money for a lot of practitioners and teachers. Whether it starts being about the money or not, at some point it have to make ends meet, have to pay the bills. At some point it does become about the money. And then others from malice and envy are working out the destinies of the damned. They're there. That you have teachers who are saying to their students, you can't go to doctors and take medicine, otherwise you won't be safe. And then, but they're not teaching the self-examination. They're only teaching just, you're not ill. Okay, get it? You're not ill. There's no sickness. Come on, let's get it. And I'm going to give you this phrase 5 million times. And pretend that you're a spiritual being. Feel like you're a spiritual being. Sit down and go, and just think I'm a spiritual being for a while. And then, they're teaching you all this stuff that's okay, but nothing that's going to heal you, where you're going to get the demonstration. And so, but don't go to doctors to take medicine, but I'm unknowingly not teaching you how to heal. And then reaping the benefit of every person in their association and every person around, calling them for healing, because they can heal on a mental, material level. Or maybe they are a healer, but they're not a teacher. Maybe they do know how to heal at that level of the Christ healing demonstration, but they don't know how to teach. And that they were never meant to be a teacher, but they thought that was the path. And so they just get the money, and they're like, oh, these people, they're not making any progress. They're just, but what am I going to do about it? It's between them and God. I'll take their money. And they do it in a way that's well, it's not my responsibility to no, but you're teaching them wrong. You're not teaching the correct things that they need to have this, awakening moment, this Saul to Paul conversion, this, you're depriving them of that by telling them that the other stuff is Christian Science, the stuff that's not, just believe you're not ill. The trouble with Christian Science is they believe illness. That's what he said. My teacher said, that's the trouble with Christian. That's the trouble with Christian Science, that they believe they're ill. Oh my Lord. That's not the trouble. The trouble is we don't know true Christian Science, because you're all running around telling us, this is true Christian Science, this, and it's all about, and you're confusing us. Wouldn't it be nice if you just told us, like, go to God? Learn to listen. Learn to go to God. Let God lead you. I'm not going to give you rules. I'm not going to give you, like, limitations. I'm not going to give you anything like that. I'm going to say go to God and do whatever God says. And it may be something totally like that you would think, oh, that's crazy. Like, live your life without apologizing, without pretending that you're not doing these things. Like, let everyone know this is how I am. Like, deal with it. Like, that might come to you to be like, this is how I am, deal with it. Like, I have a beer on Sundays when I go out with my friends, or something, or I have 3 beers, or or more. I don't know what you do, or what we do, but why are you ashamed of it? Why are we hiding it? Like, if the teachers are saying, depend on God, go to God, and not spending entire associations and teaching you how to treat illness, and they're just like, their association meeting might be 45 minutes. Well, thank you for coming. Again, I'll remind you, go to God. I opened my, prose works this morning. This is what came to me to share. I'll read it. Any questions? Okay. Remember, it's all about your relationship to God. Listen to God. Ask God to show you the roadblocks in your thinking, the things that are keeping you from advancing. And let those things go once they are revealed. Any more questions? Okay, love you guys. See you next year. Or maybe we don't have a social, or class. You couldn't have 2 weeks of class with that. You're like, well, first day, turn to God without reservation. Do exactly what He says. Second day, oh, let's turn to God without reservation and do exactly what God says. Third day, because when you let God run you be your teacher, be your practitioner, be your church, be your guide, you start to learn all kinds of cool stuff. And if you have no limitations on that stuff, it's even more profound, because you don't have restrictions on, oh, maybe I shouldn't read this book that I'm being led to read, but in the past I would never, but some teacher like mine said, oh, be careful about those books. There's a lot of wrong teachings out there. And so I threw away books when he told me that. I threw away books. I threw away Bicknell Young's Oneness, because I thought, oh, we're not supposed to read that stuff. Because I had bought it at the bookmark. And that is just a wonderfully profound article, Bicknell Young's Oneness. How many years did that set me back on my studies? Because I was being led to it, and I was like, when I read it, I would cry. I would, like, the earth was like, things were opening up to me. I was like, whoa, and then boom, shut it down. 3 years, I think I went before I felt like I could pick it up again, because I learned, that's when I learned not to listen and to other people. So take heed. Let your own true self, your higher self, God, be your guide, and realize that's, you might be led through that then to somebody else, to a teacher or to a practitioner. Who knows? I can't tell you how you're going to be led. It's going to be this beautiful adventure between you and God, and I cannot tell you. And I have no idea, and hopefully no one else does. That's between you and God, and hopefully everyone just lets you be, and they probably won't. So take heed, and stop listening to everybody else's opinion on Christian Science and what everybody else thinks, because you think they must be right and you must be wrong already. You're already coming into it thinking, oh, these teachers in the movement, the ones that are like lecturing and the ones that like have such big, and they're so wealthy, and they must know, because everyone's like, oh, go to them, take them as your teacher, go to class with them, and blah, 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 blah. And So if you can let that go and go, okay, I'm not gonna be mesmerized by that anymore. I'm not gonna judge a book by its cover anymore. I'm gonna just go within and do my own work, and I'm gonna be the Christian Zionist God wants me to be. And I think, I wish, we all would have been taught that, especially us generational Christian Zionists, where we got so much layers upon layers of other people's opinions about Christian Science, and now we have to work out of it. But if you are humble and you're willing, God will lead you out of it. And maybe the experiences that we had are experiences that, we need, so we never do the same thing to others. It's like what has been done to us can only make us stronger, can only make us more proponents of not trying to teach others, or not trying to, lead others and say, oh, this teacher or that teacher, or, oh, you can't take this and you can't do that, and maybe this experience will, will be the thing that turns everything around for many, many people, because we refuse to any longer be a part of dictating what Christian Science is and isn't to others, and letting it be totally between them and God, everyone between them and God. And obviously Mrs. Eddy did that. She said, she couldn't help that people were coming in and being practitioners and teachers and then turning out to be charlatans, and because she wasn't the one approving them. She wasn't the one, the church was running on its own at this time, and she was wanting to be away from it all. She didn't want to be a part of it. She wanted to go to her home in was it Concord, and be away from all that. That was not her church. That was, their church. But all she could do was, she could give warnings, and she could write her articles, and, she could do that. But she had to let them learn these things. And so if we take heed from her and be like her, and let others, it's their path, it's their journey. And it's hard when you see people struggling with really, with illnesses, and they're still trying to do it the old way, affirm the truth, deny the error. What is the treatment I need to heal this situation? You have to let that go, and you have to just do it, yourself, your own relationship to God, your own listening, your own following. You're walking the path that's set up for you. And maybe by your example, others will see that there's another way. So, hope that